Terra Symbolica fans, not hands, fans. We are here with Mr. Dean Kalymniou, a good friend of mine who is a renowned Greek playwright and poet, who's written several children's books as well, a bastion of the Greek Australian community here in Melbourne, Victoria, in Australia, who was very gracious to offer his time to satisfy a curiosity, an intellectual and indeed personal and cultural curiosity of mine, namely, why is it that the country of our cultural, mutual cultural inheritance, the Hellenic Republic, modern day Greece, has seemed to suffer so much at the hands of its neighbors? What's the symbolism behind that? Um, Dean, you can tell us a little bit about your own connection to Greece, your own background, and how your deep love for Greece and your knowledge of Greek history informs your approach to Greece itself and to Greeks in the diaspora, who you do so much for. And this is something that has to be commended, how much you do for your beloved compatriots here in this country and abroad and in Greece. So, Dean, thank you for joining me. And yeah, please, I turn it over to you. Why is it that, for example, in that last sticho of Notis Fakianakis' song «Εγώ είμαι Έλληνας», he says θα αφανίσει αυτούς που για χρόνια οδηγούν την Ελλάδα στη κατηφόρα.
Thank you for that introduction. I have to admit, I'm not familiar with Notis Fakianakis' song,
Okay.
only because he is one of the few modern Greek singers whose voice really grates on me. The other one
Okay.
is Gazanzidis. And every time I hear a song of his, I just have to turn off the radio or whatever appliance is belting out
Get out. I was
what
bringing on
purports to be music. But that aside, and that's a personal view I have to add. What an interesting and fascinating topic. Why do we suffer what we suffer? And there is a very quick answer, which I will give you in 2 seconds, and then we can all go home.
Okay.
And the answer is this: because we're in the way. You know, when you're in the airport or you're in the public space and you're in a thoroughfare and people want to go left and people go right and you're in the middle. And I'm one of those people who always find myself, no matter where I'm standing, no matter how hard I try to be inobtrusive, I'm always standing in the way of someone. And that is Greece. Greece is always in the way. If it's in the way geographically, if it's in the way culturally, if it's in the way politically, it's a country which is always in the way. It's also on the way. It's on the way to Europe. It's on the way to Africa. It is on the way to Asia. It is on the way to the north.
That's right.
And therefore, it is a country that basically gets buffeted by all of the winds of time and the vicissitudes of nature without shelter and without let up. It's incessant. It's been so throughout the at least 3,000 years of history that we know about. I mean, you go back to the time of the Hittites, and we didn't hit it off with the Hittites. Trojan Wars, the barbarian invasions before that, the Persian invasions. We are in the way. We are so in the way. And this is even before the invention of Santorini and Mykonos, my friend. So yeah,
Yeah,
what a
yeah, yeah.
great topic. Thank you for conceiving this as a really important thing to discuss.
Well, look, I mean, the way that you put it is really interesting because we did ancient Greek and Roman art and architecture recently in the class that I teach. And just looking at the Greek capitals and various other things, how they emerged, the Doric and Ionic. And we spoke about some of the things that you flagged, the barbarian invasions and everything else, and how this shapes Greece's topography. And I spoke about the fact that, the topography of Greece, its mountainous terrain, which allowed or facilitated the development of the polis, the city-state, right? Which are self-contained units of civic or urban administration and organization. That's because the communities settle and flourish with a mountain here and an ocean there. And I don't see necessarily the cognate ethnically community on the other side of the mountain. So I develop a regional difference, let's say. These regional differences are still present with us today, aren't they? As Greeks. I was speaking about Greece as a macro thing, but actually it's a lot of micro things too, right?
Well, look, you could argue that of many countries, Italy being an example. And Italy is mountainous, Italy is rugged. Italy, even today, is broken up into regions and dialects, much more so than Greece. And yet, these were people who were able to cohere to form a whole and create an empire. So maybe the question is if you're arguing that it is terrain that determines political culture and the trajectory of history, to what extent is that so? And to what extent could you argue, are there inherent elements within a certain identity or a certain bunch of people who decide, for whatever reason, to include each other in the imagined communities, if we want to quote Benedict Anderson, that create that kind of identity? For me, that's interesting, fascinating. I mean, I look at Rome, and there's a lot of research lately being done into the early Rome, the formation of the small communities that could have dominated Rome but did not, and then finally allowed, because it was a corporate merger, if you like, Rome to take over the board. Much of that could have been Greece. I mean, you could possibly parallel Rome and Rome's unification, in inverted commas, of the Italic Peninsula with the Macedonian kings, albeit under a different form of government. And the parallel would extend to the fact that the Macedonians then went to conquer the East and create an empire, as did Rome, and everyone gets a go.
And the modern state of Italy kind of repeats that with aggiornamento that took place in late 19th century.
Absolutely, which we then parallel to our own megali there, which is to take back or to redeem or to conquer, depending on if you're on the other side of the foot, lands which were believed to belong to a resurgent ethnos. So there you have the whole thing. And I mean, if you want to tie the two together, you can talk about the Garibaldini who fought in Greece, especially in the late 19th century, early 20th century, for the liberation of Epirus. You know, you had your Garibaldini contingent come over from Italy to assist, because that was already something they had experience in.
That's so interesting.
Okay, we begin with the revolution.
I mean, with what would lead to the emergence of the modern Greek state. We can talk about the background to the revolution and how the Greeks were under Ottoman occupation for 400 years. And even the notion of Hellenism is rehabilitated in the late Byzantine period within Constantinople by intellectuals like Emistos Plithon and others, Greek speakers within Greece and what's now modern day Istanbul, Constantinople, refer to themselves, and of course Asia Minor, refer to themselves as Romi, right? So there's a whole complex of factors affecting Greek identity at the end of the Middle Ages. Let's say that happens with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, 29th of May 1453, for the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium. That's the end of the Middle Ages. And the beginning of modernity, which intellectually speaking, you know, Western Europe, continental Europe likes to kind of start with Descartes, you know, 1600s, to kind of talk about the beginning of the modern.
Absolutely. I zoom, therefore I am.
Well, I assume, therefore I am. That's
Yeah.
right. Where does modernity then start for Greece if it's under Ottoman occupation and the Balkans, etc., etc.?
Well, this is a great question, and there is not one good answer, but I'll hazard this. Modernity starts from outside Greece. Modernity starts from the expatriate communities in such places as Vienna and Hamburg and London and Italy, where Greek merchants are coming across these intellectual trends, consider them of value, and then try to import them back into Greece, or at least create an intellectual culture outside of Greece, which they hope will permeate eventually in the fullness of time, and when things are ready, the motherland, if you will. And there are a lot of those people. There was the Metropolitan of Ugro-Wallachia, who was in Italy, in Padua, contributing to this. There were many scholars who were interested in the Enlightenment. There were patriarchs and archbishops, because remember, we have the patriarch in Constantinople, and he's communicating with his expatriate archbishops and metropolitans all over Europe. And these Enlightenment, in inverted commas, ideas are filtering, and they're coming through into Greece through Constantinople. You have people like Evgenios Voulgaris, the great cleric who also wrote a law code for Catherine the Great back
That's
in the day. I've got a copy of it at home. You have people like the Zappas and the brothers, wealthy merchants who would go and translate or commission translations of philosophical treatises into Greek. And you see the frontispiece of these books have inscriptions that say this book was translated by so and so at the expense of, for example, the Zappas brothers, in order that this book may enlighten the future generations of a free Greece. So already Greece intellectually, as much as it is contingent and depending upon Constantinople and the Patriarchate for its historical memory and, if you like, identity, at the same time, there is a reaching out to Europe for the new.
yeah.
A lot of historians up until now, especially Greek ones, have presented that as an either or. You're either for Constantinople, the church, and Byzantium and obscurantism, or you were for the Enlightenment and the West. And obviously, that makes no sense. Um,
Well, the
all
late
of these intellectual currents were permeating Europe. You had ecumenical patriarchs who were conversing with the Lutherans and with the Anglicans and arguing about ideas. You had German
Cyrillic.
scholars who were writing to the Patriarch and to Greeks within the Ottoman Empire, seeking information and notes about the current state of the Greek language, about their thoughts, about whether they had any affinity to the ancient Greeks. And you had that rediscovery of the ancient Greek texts by the West, which began in the Renaissance and was continuing in the reinterpretation. What we have as Greeks is a loss. And that great loss is the ability to view the ancient past as a continuum. So, right up until Byzantium, the ancient texts were interpreted, discussed in various ways, used, quoted. We lose that. We lose the ability to read those texts as part of a united Greek speaking tradition. And then we rediscover that from the West and import that tradition, which is the Western tradition, back into Greece with all of the cultural stigmata that follow from that, which creates, I think, a sense of ontopathology, an idea that of an unworthiness, because it is not a culture which has grown within Greece. It's an imported and exported culture, which I think modern Greece is still trying to find its feet with.
That's such an interesting observation that the break of the continuity between the ancient and medieval literary and cultural traditions within the Greek-speaking world is marked by a reimposition of the retrieval of Hellenic ideals, classical Greece, by Germans and Italians and
Well,
very
not really of Hellenic ideals, of their interpretation of Hellenic ideals.
their interpretation of Hellenic
Yeah, I
ideals.
mean, here we go post-colonial, yeah, and
Yeah,
Orientalist, and argue what were they trying to do, not what we were trying to do. But then again, it all comes down to this: you pander and you market yourself according to what the donors and the punters want. So if those who are going to assist us and give us some money and funding want us to be toga-wearing ancient Greeks, we'll emphasize that part. If, on the other hand, they want us to be uh, monkish, incense-smelling, chanting spiritualists, we'll do that, whatever gets us to where we need to go. And I think Greece, both modern and Renascent, was very good at doing this, at least for some time.
for some time. I mean, you see the topographical marks of this on the Parthenon itself, right? The way that the German archaeologists basically stripped it of its interstitial history between ancient Greece and the emergent modern period. All of the Christian intermediary, if you like, trappings of the Parthenon. Its cross, its marble Christian friezes were taken off in order to show it as it was, ostensibly under Pericles, right? But we know that that's doing violence to 1,000 years of that building's history because
Absolutely. It was a Christian church for the longest time in its history. And this is never, ever, or rarely mentioned or marketed or emphasized in the modern Greek discourse. And the reason why is because, again, it's that polarization, which for me is ridiculous, between the religious Constantinople oriented conception of what Greek identity is about and that ancient identity. And I mean, also, let's not forget that for hundreds of years it was a mosque.
and there was a mosque built within it. That was the mosque of the
Absolutely.
German
Not
Empire.
only that, but that it's now a museum and isn't a religious building, although you could argue it's a temple to the West's worship of their ideal of Hellenism, which is great. And we're happy to play along.
Yeah.
And we're happy to ask for the marbles back because that feeds into that. Come all and worship at our temple, because if you worship at that temple, vicariously you're worshipping us, or so we'd like to think. But are they? No, they're not, because
No.
obviously that kind of discourse leads to feelings of inadequacy, where we are in no way, and we can go through scholarship from Byron onwards, in no way are we true and worthy descendants of these people. We are those debased Orientals who don't deserve our luck.
Or, certainly that disposition is there, but we're not necessarily even in charge of our own patrimony. I mean, that's a real grating phenomenon to constantly have your own cultural productions um, manipulated by external factors and external agents who have ulterior motives, you know. And
Well, archaeological looting's been around since the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Yeah, they'd conquer each other's cities and then take their gods and their artifacts into their own temples.
that's right.
So the Neo-Assyrians in the British Museum are just following suit.
That's right. And it's not limited to the Parthenon as well in this immediate context. Just down the hill, the Acropolis, you have the Temple of Hephaestus, which was also a church dedicated to St. George Akamaki.
Absolutely was,
Many,
yeah.
many examples. Can I read you something very interesting? Because maybe we can, because a similar thing is happening in Russia around this time of early
Yep,
modernity as well. Peter the Great, of course, found St. Petersburg, directly models it on the way cities are built in Amsterdam and Venice,
yep.
in particular. A magnificent city. I've been a couple of times and I'm in love with it, you know. It's a Crassus, a kind of conflation of Russian Byzantine, Baroque, and Rococo throughout, right?
Yep.
But there's this interesting poem that was written at the birth of Peter the Great that I wanted to share with you because it links Russia's interest in Greece around that time as well. And maybe we can speak about Greece as the nexus, at the nexus of competing interests, continental, Western, and Eurasian, around the time of the revolution. The month of May, so this is the following text is of Polotsky's verses, which is Simeon Polotsky, Ode on the Birth of Peter the First. Okay. The month of May ushers forth unto us great rejoicing. Prince Peter's birth a crown upon its progress placing. Yesterday, great Tsargrad, the Russian name of Constantinople, by evil Turks was taken. In her today sweet hope and freedom's song awaken. The conqueror is here, her vengeance now to give her, our great imperial city, well, that's Moscow in this context, this day to deliver. O Constantinograd, arise in exultation. Sophia, Hagia Sophia, lift your lamps on high in celebration. Today, born unto us as Orthodox Tsarevich, comes the great prince of Moscow, Peter Alexeyevich, who is Peter the Great. So this was
Wow.
a poem written around the time of his birth, foreseeing him as someone that would restore Orthodox Constantinople, you
Yep.
know, which had become Istanbul, of course, the capital of the
Brilliant.
Ottoman Empire. So, as a pretext, what's the interest there? What's going on?
Well, this is a way of legitimizing old Russia at the same time, well, no one was going to know that Peter the Great would be the great Westernizer. Yeah. But the Russian princes of Moscow, who ultimately achieved ascendancy over all the other small principalities in order to create the new Russia, did so by claiming their descendants from Sofia Paleologina, yeah, in the last imperial royal family of Constantinople. Constantinople falls, the Balkans, where the Orthodox Christians live, also fall under the Ottomans. The only free Orthodox country that exists is Russia. And Russia, in order to have influence on these Orthodox Christians and in order to legitimize its own rule, seeks to do so based on its origins. And I mean, we know that the Kievan Rus were Christianized by missionaries from Constantinople and through diplomacy. Yeah. And we also know that there was that imperial link with Sofia Paleologina. And then there's also that great idea, and I use that term purposely, Meghalidea was saying Greek, to liberate Constantinople and to refound the Byzantine Empire, according to the Russians, under Russian either suzerainty or influence or assistance. That's something that remained. Catherine the Great famously named one of her grandsons Constantine because she was going to place him on the throne of the newly liberated Constantinople. The capture of Constantinople also figured in the First World War in Tsar Nicholas's plans, and the whole idea was that he had already pre-worked out with the Allies that he was going to receive Constantinople as part of the war booty upon the successful prosecution of the war. So Constantinople looms large in the Russian imagination. It is, I think it operates in tandem with their other with the other imperial ambitions of Russia.
So what happened then around this period? Because that's an early 1600s, this poem, mid 1600s.
Yeah.
What happens in terms of preventing, from a Western point of view, a sort of, because Greece was essentially at a crossroads to, based on the intellectual currents that you mentioned earlier, turn westwards and embrace a kind of Western representation of Greece, which it did in the end, for better or worse, it's still playing out, or to turn northeastwards towards Moscow and then later St. Petersburg. That would have created a corridor between Russia, the Black Sea, the Bosphorus, the Dardanelles, leading into the Eastern Mediterranean, which is, of course, something of would be a bulwark, let's say, against Western European continental influence in
Yeah.
that region. And of course, the trade routes, the natural resources, all that sort of thing. So, I mean, do we know of any historical examples where Catherine the Great tried to get close?
Yes, we know lots of examples. We know that Peter the Great tried to move south because remember that at this time, the Ottoman Empire is not only controlling the Balkans and Asia Minor, it's also controlling the territory which is now southern Ukraine and parts of Russia. Yeah, the Khanate of the Crimean Horde, which is subject to the Sultan. So the push south is considered a war of liberation. Yeah, and that is the origin of the Cossacks. I mean, the word Kazakh is a Turkish word.
I didn't know.
Yep. And the Cossacks are basically just like the Kleftes of the Greeks, the Hayduks of the Balkans, freedom fighters who live on the borders, Ukraine, the borderland.
Mhm.
And they are basically living free and trying to fight off the Turks who are occupying territory. Yeah. Some of that territory, of course, is ancient Greek lands held by Byzantium, especially the Crimea. We remember that the last Greek-speaking and Byzantine part of the empire to fall to the Ottomans was actually in the Crimea, the Principality of San Fyodoro, not Constantinople, not Trapezunda, not Mistrasin. the Peloponnese, it was San Theodora in the Crimea. So all these things are linked.
I had no idea. I
And
always
yeah,
thought,
and it is, I think, no coincidence that Catherine the Great, I mean, she conceives of this idea of reaching the Straits of the Bosphorus, but she's also offering a safe haven to the Greeks. So while the that southern, what we call Novorossiya, they called Novorossiya, yeah, is being liberated from the Ottomans, she sends out a call and says, "Okay, you enslaved Greeks, any of you want to migrate up here? Please feel free to do so. We'll find you some land, find you jobs, and we'll give you a 10-year remission on taxes."
wow, okay.
Now, there's already a very small population of Greeks, remnants, historical populations, remnants of previous times, but a lot of Greeks seeking opportunities and freedom flock to this area. And then Catherine the Great does something amazing. She gives all of these reclaimed territories their ancient Greek names, which is why you have Kherson, Chersona, Sevastopol, Sebastopol, all these names, Feodosia, Feodosia,
Hmm.
uh, because this is part of this grand plan where all these people were going to eventually coalesce to form a renascent Byzantium. And this is at the same time when she's talking to Voltaire, no, who's the opposite, if you like, of clerical obscurity.
Yeah, Voltaire, definitely. Yeah,
It's at the same time where people like the cleric Evgenios Vulgaris are writing laws and constitutions and law codes for her. And it's just amazing how this is happening. And I mean, we know, of course, obviously, that there were the all of revolts. So we're talking about how did Greece choose one or the other? My argument is Greece didn't choose anything. Things were done to Greece. If we go back to the prophecies of Archangel, yeah, who was their so-called prophecies, which actually probably weren't true and was just some literature which was circulating amongst the enslaved Greeks at the time. There was that idea that the toxanthon genos thamasosi, the blonde race, will save us. Uh, some scholars contend that that was actually the Germans, but in the popular imagination, it was the Russians, and they were going to come down as the big brother of the Greeks, and they were going to save Greece of all her ills, and everything was going to be fine and dandy. So I think not so much today, but still today, that expectation, that belief exists that Russia is Greece's big brother, that Russia can help. Some people believe she will, others are disappointed that they're not, but that is always the Greek relationship with Russia.
yeah,
Russia is our big brother, and we seek help. Whether we get it or not, or whether we think that we get it or not, is something else. So that needs to be considered before we get anywhere. Greeks always looked to Russia, and they
yeah.
looked to Russia because of the common faith. There was no
That's
other reason. There was no closeness. They're far away. No, there are other Slavic people who are closer, Bulgarians, Serbs, who until the rise of nationalism were also considered brothers. But Russia was that place, and it was far off enough to fuel the imagination
yeah,
where everything could happen. And Russia was also a haven. Russia was the place that you could run off to, or you could migrate to, and make a lot of money. Yeah, and people did. They made huge amounts of money in Russia, and they were very successful. They became really, really influential. I just finished writing an article about Greeks who entered the Cossack army in the 16th century, in the 17th century, made a killing in Siberia.
wow, okay,
Um,
yeah,
Very important Greek influence in the armies. People looking for employment there, because I mean, Greeks are a peripatetic people. They migrate, yeah. So
yeah,
there's that, and there's also the merchants who make a lot of money in Russia, and then start thinking, well, you know what? This is a safe place. We can raise money here, and here's a good place where we can start thinking about the liberation of
that's
Greece.
that's so
Happened to
interesting.
foment some revolts in Greece, the Orlov revolts. Then there's a few other bits and pieces where she sends down the Orlov brothers and says, okay, they land in Peloponnesos. Um, the Peloponnesians are saying, is that it? Where's the rest of the army? We're not going to rise up. That sort of, if you like, bursts the bubble of Russian assistance. Places like my father's island of Samos were occupied by the Russians for 2 years.
Wow, okay,
So there's all of that happening. But at the end of the day, Two things are happening. One is that the Russians aren't following through. Two is you have the diplomatic chessboard arrayed against them. No other European power wants Russia to have a warm water port. At the same time that Russia is considering expanding southwards, Russia is expanding eastwards at a tremendous rate. At the same time, the British have interests eastwards. India, the great game, we're at the beginning of this. So the whole idea is who gets where first and how do you knock out the other person from the game? In terms of Greece, that plays out in various ways. First of all, we know that the Filiki Eteria, the friendly society, which was the secret society that conceived of the revolution, began to fund the revolution, was founded in Russia. It was founded in Odessa.
Really?
Yes. And if you go to Odessa today, you can still find that building where it was founded because it's a museum. Odessa being a very important city for expatriate Greeks right up until the Russian Revolution. It's a very cosmopolitan city. And later on, the Greeks would participate and actually instigate riots and pogroms against the Jews of the city because they were economic rivals. So there's a big history of Greeks in Odessa. Be that as it may, Greeks in Greece know Odessa, apart from the fact it was an ancient Greek colony. For that, the Filiki Eteria was founded in Odessa.
Wow.
Ypsilantis, who was to go on and to declare the revolution, cross the River Pruth into Moldavia when he was told not to by the Russian Tsar, received his training in Russia. Capodistrias, the first governor of Greece, was a foreign minister of Russia, along with Count Nesselrode. He wrote the Constitution of Switzerland. He was instrumental in creating the New World Order after the demise of Napoleon.
Okay.
And these are the people who are leveraging their Russian connections in order to either embroil Russia in the war of the revolution against her will, or at least to keep a toe in the game. Now, Russia was not interested at this stage and along these terms of supporting these revolutions because there's always that idea after Napoleon had stirred everything up, there was a need for quiet. There was also the fear that encouraging nationalist revolutions would lead to the breakup of the Russian and all the other European empires and create chaos. The emphasis was security and stability. You know? However, there's a great amount of sympathy for the Greek cause in Russia, and we know that more money was raised in Russia than any other country for the redemption of Greek slaves and Greek captives during the Greek Revolution.
I believe that.
So a lot of slaves were being captured on the Greek mainland or elsewhere, taken into Anatolia, sold as slaves. Especially Prince Galitzin would raise money to redeem these slaves. That's something which modern Greek historiography tends to forget. The interesting thing that you have with the Greek Revolution is that after Greece is liberated and a rudimentary parliament is formed, and of course, let's not forget the Battle of Navarino, which is considered a battle, the last naval battle, where the Ottomans were bested. There was a Russian involvement in that battle. We forget that. Yeah, it wasn't just the British under Codrington. There was a Russian involvement as well. And if you go to Navarino, there is a monument to the Russians who were killed at the Battle of Navarino.
These are important things to say because they often get sort of.
I think we do need to mention these things. So
Yeah.
there's that which is very important. But the modern Greek state is created. Some form of parliamentary democracy is mooted. Capodistrias, having been schooled in the Russian tradition of autocracy, is not the right man for Greece, and he cannot relate to conditions on the ground which are anarchic and which basically are comprised of various warlords seeking to retain their pre-war privileges and their influence.
And you're referring here to Kolokotronis.
I'm referring to all of them. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
referring to all of them. But I mean, Kolokotroni, if you want to have a look at him, he was the head of the Russian party.
Get out of
So
town.
you have in the politics of Greece the French party, which is comprised of people who are influenced by France and want to further French interests. You have the British party obviously funded by the British and furthering British interests in Greece. And you have the Russian party. Nowhere do you have the Greek party.
No.
I think that says something about how Greece was set up in terms of sovereignty.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But you have that, and you have that influence and that interest in Greek affairs. It manifests itself ecclesiastically when Greece is trying to create its own under Otto Church of Greece. The Russians are opposed to that. They don't like the idea. They consider that to be a dangerous Protestant idea. They affirm the ecumenicity of the ecumenical patriarchate. And you have the Crimean War. And the Crimean War is fought because Russia comes to the defense of the Orthodox Church in Jerusalem because the French, especially under French influence, the holy sites, which are controlled by the Greek-speaking Orthodox Church in the Holy Land, are being taken away from that church and given to France.
Really?
So Russia steps in to protect those sites, according to their view, for Greek-speaking Orthodoxy.
Wow.
And the whole war is fought in the Crimea for this. And
Didn't even know such a thing took place.
okay, and then you have that bizarre situation where France and England are allying with Turkey, a country which was being excoriated in the press, in the Philhellenic press, over its excesses and barbarous use of force during the Greek Revolution and before. They ally with Turkey in order to fight Russia and its sole ally, who is who in the Crimean War? Greece. Greece sends soldiers to Russia, to the Crimea, to fight. The other thing that they do in Russia is they create, especially recruiting among native Greeks living in the Crimea and in Mariupol, in these places, they recruit an Amazon contingent of tall, striking women. Yeah,
Wow.
it's fascinating.
It
Now,
really is.
according to uh, accounts, they didn't really acquit themselves very well. These Greek contingents, they were always asking for money. They were unsuited to the terrain, but they were there. And Greece paid the price for supporting Russia in this war because the allies in whose gift it was to provide Greece with further territories chose not to do so because we chose the wrong side.
Yeah. Jeez. But look, it's striking that Britain and France would align themselves with the flailing, uh, decadent Ottoman Empire against the Russians and the Greeks in that scenario. There's a there's a degree of underlying Russophobia there because if you're not aligning yourself with a Christian counterpart, even though if irrespective that it's a different kind of Christianity, but are aligning yourself with the Ottomans, uh, this is done out of mutual selfish interest and not necessarily for noble ideological purposes, right? Is that a fair enough assumption to make?
Look, I think that that's absolutely correct. There is that underlying assumption that you've raised, which is that all of these countries are Christian, therefore they will band together, and that's absolutely not correct.
Yeah, okay.
That is an assumption which, to their detriment, Middle Eastern Christians make today,
Hmm.
where they say we're Christian, the West is Christian, therefore we'll be protected. And we all know how that's panned out, the
Yeah.
Christian minorities in the Middle East. But apart from that, there's, as I said, the great game. And Russia and Turkey is known as the sick man of Europe.
That's
And
right.
everyone wants to dominate that sick man of Europe, but it is in the interests of these parties to preserve the life of this sick man of Europe, life support until they can figure out who's going to get the biggest chunk. Now, we
Wow.
know the Russians want Constantinople. We know the French are eyeing Syria, and eventually they take over um, the Lebanon mountains using the Maronites as their lever, the protection of the Maronites. The Turks go and create ethnic massacres among the Maronites in Lebanon, and that's the excuse which is provided for France to put their toehold in there,
Mhm.
as
I
a
didn't.
protector of the Catholics there. So that happens. The British want their passage to Persia and India to be unimpeded, which is why they end up in 1878 with Cyprus.
Which is a bizarre phenomenon. And they had it until when? the 19 mid 20th century. When did they?
Well, technically, they've still got parts of it because they've got the bases there, which are now being hit by Iran.
That's right.
So you see how these things work. And all of these countries are basically trying to outmaneuver each other strategically and gain the ascendancy they can. So part of the game is to block each country from doing so, or at least to minimize that creep. You know, Russia gets to the gates of Constantinople in 1878. Now you have the Battle of Varna. They're at Adrianople. They're at the gates of Constantinople. Then there's the Treaty of Saint Stefano. Off you go, go back. Yeah. The whole game in terms of the West is keep Russia out of the warm water ports. We don't want them there. Have your cold water ports, Vladivostok, your Arkhangelsk, but we don't want you anywhere near the Bosporus. Yeah.
Wow.
That's also the consideration strategically during the Second World War with NATO, why Turkey became strategically important after that period of time. It's always the same thing. But you talk about shifting alliances. We know that in 1916, Trapezunda, Trebizond of Pondos, was occupied by the Russian army, and they basically shielded the Greeks of the region from being subject to the genocide that the rest of Turkey was suffering. Yeah, but then you have the Russian Revolution, and then you have the switch. Lenin allies himself with Kemal Atatürk.
No,
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
and funds his campaign and withdraws the army from Pontus, which means that the armies of the nationalist Turks are able to occupy that region and ethnically cleanse it. So,
One
yeah,
second.
this is a game of chess which is switching and changing.
That's so interesting and sad, in relation to the Greeks of Pontus. Because, the concern that the Russians had for the Greek speakers of these regions out of this shared Orthodox faith, uh, it is completely gaslit these days, partly because of the ecclesiastical reasons you mentioned earlier with the schism between Constantinople and Moscow, which has very debatable sources. There's a unilateral pro-Constantinopolitan approach, which seems to uh, circumnavigate around the nuances actually of the topic, but we don't have to delve into that because it's
Well,
political.
we can delve into it only insofar as to say that if you follow the modern Greek discourse within Greece, I don't think that that support is as monolithic as you might think. Even today, that, if you like, shine, glow attraction of Holy Mother Russia as our big brother pervades the discourse, and many Greeks are sympathetic to Russia, and many Greeks view Russia uncritically, old dad. Yeah. So it's not as if there is a polarization within the Greek discourse that our patriarch in Constantinople is perfect and correct in everything that's going on, and Russia is not, and Russia is evil. I think it's more subtle than that.
Okay, okay.
And I don't know what the discourse like is within Russia in relation to this, but I know that among the Greeks and following online chatter comments, entering into discussions, yes, people tend to, for matters of belonging and sympathy, support their own side, but I don't think that they view this matter uncritically and without nuance. That aside, bit of trivia because we're talking about Bondos.
Mhm.
Tchaikovsky visited the monastery of Panagia Soumela in Pondos and wrote a symphony there while he was there for 3 days. So there
Uh,
you go.
what was the name
Um,
of the symphony?
there, you've got me on the hop. I can't remember. I'll look it up and get back to
Oh,
you at
no,
some stage.
out of interest, because I visited his grave actually in the Saint
Yeah.
Nevsky Monastery in St. Petersburg with Victoria.
And you know, Pushkin, the great Pushkin, now we're talking about great iconic figures, was a complete Hellenophile. He was crazy about Greeks.
Yeah,
He
absolutely.
was constantly writing poems exhorting people to take arms and go and fight in Greece. And he was going to go and fight in Greece, but he didn't because he was too busy making love to everybody's wives,
That's all right.
which is what he did. And you know, Capodistrias actually saved him from being exiled.
You were telling me about this.
Yeah, because here is this Pushkin writing various seditious and satirical poems against the Tsar and against autocracy, things like that. And the Tsar gets to hear of it, and the whole idea is, well, this guy's got to go, and we'll either exile him to Siberia. We're not going to kill him, but we'll probably exile him to Siberia. And it's Capodistrias who intercedes with the Tsar and says, look, I know him. He's a good guy. He's very famous. The letter still exists.
Wow.
He's a great poet. Don't destroy this young, promising man's life, even before it started. Give him another chance.
Yeah.
And Capodistrias' plea is heard, and Pushkin gets sent to Chisinau in Moldova, where he's told that he must lodge with the governor, who will take his education into hand and his retraining. And of course, what Pushkin does is seduce his wife in the greatest of all Pushkin traditions. But
That's
Pushkin was
right.
basically saved by Capodistrias, and the poems that he writes about the necessity of saving Greece are actually quite stirring.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, when the revolution, because the Greek Revolution started in Romania, didn't start in Greece. You know, they crossed Ypsilantis, crossed the River Pruth into uh, Moldovallachia, as it was known at the time, and they were not ready. It was disorganized. Also, they failed to meet up and raise and inspire the Romanians who they thought would join their cause. Didn't work because the Ottomans were ruling these provinces with Greek princes from Fanar in Constantinople who were just as rapacious as the Turks.
Yeah.
The
That's
Romanians didn't want any part of this.
right.
That's an aside. Um, so Pushkin records how all of these captains and dashing people on one side of the border would then find themselves back across that side of the border, sipping in cafes and talking about deeds of strength, having lost everything. And he
Yeah.
writes about that and he sketches these people. It's quite amazing.
That's so interesting. Well, his bust is everywhere in the major metropolises of
As it should be. His bust should be everywhere in Greece.
yeah,
Great Philhellenism.
in Greece as well. Yeah, no, I mean, I can't tell you my wife sharing with me stanzas from his poetry and how they're taught in Siberia, which is where she grew up, to interiorize Pushkin's beautiful poetry. But that's all these things are very interesting. In terms of, we've demonstrated that at least with the Russian-Greek connection, there was interest on the Russian side for various motivations. But what you've seemed to delineate is that there was a lot of sincerity there because of the mutual and shared Orthodox faith, and that this was blocked by other powers who also had an interest in Greece. Those other powers, Britain, France, Germany, which I want to ask you about the German king of Greece because I don't know myself. I want to know more details. They won out in the end in terms of the Greek mainland, Greece as a modern nation state, the Hellenic, what would become eventually the Hellenic Republic of Greece. How do we get to that republic? Who's in control at the beginning, and so on and so forth.
That's a hard one because then we have to go through the whole history of modern Greece, and we don't have time for that.
What
But
about
what I
landmark?
can tell you is this. Yes, it is a game. Who's going to win? The people that are able to get boots on the ground. Russia is far away.
Mhm.
For Russia to get to Greece, they either have to go through the mainline route through what is now Romania, Bulgaria, and the areas of northern Greece don't become Greek for another 100 years after the revolution. They only become Greek in the early 1900s, after the Balkan Wars. And in the meantime, Russia's found other champions as well because we're not the only spoiled child of Russia. Russia has kinfolk, Serbia, Bulgaria. They speak similar languages. They're more culturally aligned. And you could argue that they abandoned Greece. Greece has done its dash. Greece has other protectors. Greece has got other people that can uh, put boots on the ground. And I mean, you can see that in the when Greece was a small and unimportant little kingdom without Thessaly and Epirus and Macedonia and all these areas accreted to it, and there was a bunch of tourists who were attacked by bandits, and the British thought that the Greek response was not stringent enough. They blockaded and threatened to bomb Piraeus, which
Really?
is what they also did in the First World War when the German king did, because they were all Germans, our kings, did not want to enter the war on the Allied side, wanted to remain neutral. The French and the English bombarded Piraeus and forced them to enter into the war on their side. So you're not talking about a country that has freedom of choice. Yeah. And these people can get their ships there. Russia can't get their ships there. or
Yeah.
won't get their ships there. And Russia says, as a result, we're going to pivot towards other areas, Bulgaria and Serbia. Which
Yeah.
countries in their national aspirations become, especially Bulgaria, an enemy of Greece?
So, in relation to the German interests in Greece, which, let's say, you mentioned that there were all of the kings that Greece had were German in the 1800s. How did that come about? What were the circumstances that led to Greece not being able to govern itself
Yeah,
after
well,
the revolution?
Capodistrias is murdered, and he's murdered by members of the Petrobi clan, who it was rumored were in the pay of the English. There
Okay.
was a mutiny against him because people didn't like his rule, didn't want to obey laws. They couldn't understand the concept of a central government. Okay, and then the powers get together and they say, "Look, you guys can't govern yourselves. We need to," and obviously, there's no such thing as a Greek king. We can't find a Greek king. No, there aren't any tangible, if you like, descendants of the Byzantine emperors with a tangible link to Greece that are relevant. So what are we going to do? We've got to find someone amongst our own people to do this. And one of the first people they ask is the person who ends up becoming the first king of Belgium, Leopold.
Oh, okay.
Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, favorite uncle of Queen Elizabeth, with no Queen Elizabeth, the other one, Queen Victoria, with whom they would correspond frequently later on when she was born and grew. So he thought, yeah, this is a great idea. I'll think about this, and did some exploration, went to the English, went to the French, said, look, would you agree to have some of these borders lifted slightly north because the current borders are untenable? This is not a state with a future the way that you've drawn it. And there's a lot of heavy negotiation. And he's able to get promises for loans, but he's not able to get promises for an enlargement of territory. In the meantime, he's dealing with the various warring factions within Greece, the warlords, the interest groups, and he's saying, no, this is too hard. I can't do this. This is just the recipe for disaster. This is going to end my life. So he
Yeah.
passes it up.
Oh gosh. Okay.
He passes it up and ends up becoming the king of Belgium, and a very good king of Belgium.
Okay.
And next they go to Otto, who is the son of the king of Bavaria, Bavaria being at the time an independent kingdom. And they say, off you go. Bavaria is known for its Philhellenism. If you go to Bavaria, you see all manner of neoclassical buildings. And Otto gets dispatched to Greece, yeah, with his Bavarian advisors, who are Protestants. One of the first things they do is try and create a state church like the Protestant church in Bavaria. A lot of Bavarians are
Oh,
Catholic, but there's also that idea because their ministers are Protestant. They treat the Greeks very badly, very harshly. They are of Germanic stock and don't understand that the Greeks are an anarchic and freedom-loving people and they need to be dealt with kid gloves. Yeah. There is a revolution in, I think, 1843. Kalerius, the army captain, who again had some ties with Russia, forcing Otto to grant a constitution because up until that time he was ruling by decree, which is why when you go to Greece, you have Syntagma Square. That is the place where the revolution for the constitution took place.
oh wow. I
Yeah,
didn't know that. In Athens. Yeah, yeah. See
in
that,
Athens.
of course. Yeah, yeah.
So he leads out the army and they demand a constitution, and Otto uh, grants that constitution because he has no choice. Eventually, however, people are dissatisfied with Otto. He manages to alienate everyone, and people seek his removal. So Otto leaves. He goes back to Bavaria, where he spends his days wearing a fustanella and crying over the kingdom that he lost.
Really?
And then, yes, and then the powers get together and say, well, who's it going to be? This time, it's going to be a younger son of the King of Denmark. So they dispatch George the First to Greece. Yeah, who's a good king in the sense that he's able to balance interests, he's discreet, he's convivial and friendly. He's got connections with all the powers because you know that the King of Denmark was known as the father-in-law of Europe.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No.
Father-in-law of Europe, related to everyone, Russian royal family, English royal family, all the German royal families, everyone you can imagine. So Denmark plays a pivotal role because they are, if you like, the mediators between disputes between nations and between European royal families. And he's considered safe and sound uh, based on that connection. And of course, there's also the Russian connection because of Queen Olga, who was Russian. Yeah. And there's a street named after her in Greece, Vasilissis Olgas. And Olga did some amazing things. One of the things that Queen Olga did, which I think is most amazing, is that she was the wife of King George the First here. She championed the translation of the Bible into modern Greek the
Really?
first time and caused an absolute storm. Uh, a lot of people didn't like this. Students came out onto the streets. How dare you? The Bible must remain as it was written. But her idea was we wanted people to be able to understand what they read in the vernacular.
But that's so interesting, especially given the fact that the King of Denmark is conventionally speaking the head of the Lutheran Church, right? In
Well, it's the King of Denmark's first son who converts to Orthodoxy. I should have mentioned this. It's important.
Ah,
Otto never converted to Orthodoxy, and that was one of the bugbears. Yeah,
yeah.
that's one of the reasons why they weren't happy. George the First comes to Greece, converts to Orthodoxy, cements his Orthodox credentials by marrying a most Orthodox wife from the most Orthodox power exists, which is Russia.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Queen Olga, who's amazing, charitable, friendly, accessible. People love her. Bit of a hiccup with the Bible translation, but nothing too damaging.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she's amazing. And George the First presides over the enlargement of the Greek state. When he dies, Greece has doubled in size. He attracts the Olympic Games for the first time.
Oh, wow.
The,
Okay.
the 1896 Games, that was under him. And a really good statesman, astute diplomat. Um, and then what happens is that he's in Thessaloniki, newly liberated Thessaloniki, and he gets shot by a madman.
No.
Yeah. And his son Constantine takes over, who is doesn't have those, um, doesn't have that diplomatic skill.
Now,
Constantine is an army man.
an interesting thing about Constantine, just because it's in Donald M. Nichols, the Immortal Emperor,
Yeah.
he is presented, I can't remember by who, maybe you can clarify, with a sword that ostensibly belonged to Constantine Paleologos, the last emperor of Byzantium, at his birth or
Yeah,
something.
because the whole idea was there was that prophecy or that Constantine lost the city, King Constantine will regain the city.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that. And but he was not an astute diplomat. He was a military man, and he was married to a German princess. And he was very much German aligned, and that caused a lot of problems. The other thing that caused a lot of problems was his run-in with Eleftherios Venizelos, the Prime Minister of Greece. Those two did not get on. That culminated in the national schism during the First World War. Constantine, as I mentioned earlier, refused to enter the war on the Allied side. Venizelos went up north to Thessaloniki and created the government of national defense, Ethniki Amina, and entered in the war on the side of the Allies. So you
Wow.
have that. And that schism polarized Greece and had repercussions which are felt even today. My argument would be that the Civil War and everything that happened after that directly derives from that schism. It was significant.
That schism involves the execution of the Imerali there, right? So there's an attempt to reclaim.
Well, everyone's on the same page with the Nagagli there. The Nagagli there is, as we've said a couple of times now, regaining territory which people believe should be part of Greece because Greeks live there, with the ultimate aim of taking over Constantinople, which I might add none of the world powers wanted us to do. Because the idea was, well, the British and the French didn't want us to have Constantinople because they felt that that would be letting in Russia by the back door. They believed that the Greek sympathy for Russia was so great that we would be acting as their proxy. Russia wasn't too enamored of Greece taking over Constantinople because they felt that we would be dominated by the British and French. And you have that round of mutual suspicion all round.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there was actually that idea when Greece, skipping ahead, when Greece was losing the Greco-Turkish War in the 1920s of occupying Constantinople. And the British said, if you do that, we will fire on you.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And this is consistent with the sort of testimonies that you have around that time, the Smyrna catastrophe, of course, where British soldiers did not take in refugees that were clambering onto the boats. It's almost like protect the political status quo at the expense of the suffering average Greek, you know? And I don't even say this for nationalistic reasons, as in, I love Greece, but I'm not going to sit here and sort of, point the finger at enemies, seen or unseen. But that seems to be an abiding quality of these interferences. They're always somehow always the average Greek will suffer as a result, whether they've brought it upon themselves or not, which is another sort of argument made in relation to the march onto Constantinople by was it Venizelos? And his
Well, no one marched to Constantinople
how
because
far
it
did they
was
get?
the Treaty of Sèvres created, gave Eastern Thrace to Greece, and I think they were 30 kilometers. That territory ended 30 kilometers before Constantinople at Çatalca or Saranda Ecclesias.
Okay.
That was never ratified by Turkey, never accepted. And also the zone of Smyrna that was also awarded to Greece, subject to a 5-year plebiscite, was also never ratified. It was a pipe dream. It was a pipe dream that was cooked up by the British under Lloyd George. Venizelos was a very charismatic politician, and he was able to convince the British that he could police and follow their interests in the region. Your average British person in the Foreign Office did not believe Venizelos and were very skeptical. The zone could not be defended. It made no military sense. It didn't have definable geographic borders. But Lloyd George, Prime Minister of England, was completely under Venizelos' spell and wanted to do it. Clemenceau for France was skeptical, but was willing to follow along in the meantime. The Italians were against because they had their own ideas. Once Venizelos occupies Smyrna, and that basically creates modern Turkey, because the reaction by nationalist Turks is, well, we're not going to allow these people to occupy our motherland, and they get together under Kemal Atatürk and band together to kick the Greeks out. Once that happens, and the Allies see that Venizelos cannot control the situation, yeah, he loses support very quickly. First France, who switches sides and starts funding Atatürk's army, and in the end,
What?
England.
Funding their army
Yeah,
directly.
yeah, because they can see which way the wind is blowing. And remember, at the end of the First World War, a lot of southern Turkey is occupied by France. And it's not really defensible. And when Atatürk is able to threaten those territories, the French basically roll over. For them, it's all about protecting Syria, which they wanted to run as a colony, not willing to allow the rest of southern Anatolia go.
That's unbelievable. The degree of opportunism. And how do these circumstances contribute to the civil war later on? You mentioned that this
Well,
catastrophe.
what they do is that both sides come to power. Venizelos loses the elections right in 1920 when things are going well. The king comes back because in the meantime he kicked the king out. The king purges the Venizelos officers, Venizelos supporters. There are murders on the streets,
Okay.
both factions. This polarization, this bad blood radicalizes people, and that will be the nature of the discourse of Greek politics right up until the Civil War. You have your various coups. You have your royalists kicking out your Republicans kicking out royalists. A republic is established, yeah, until the 1930s. Then you have the Metaxas coup. That alienates people who are in the center and makes them more extreme. Yeah, you have Venizelos who are basically liberals, liberal Democrats who are exiled to Macronisos, are radicalized by communist elements there. That's how you get the civil war, because what you've got is a political culture that now deals with extremes. You don't have that convivial culture of King George I. you have people who are at each other's throats and who are supporting politics not out of conviction, but like football teams. And we have that plague right up to the present day, I think.
in Greece. You know, is there hope amidst this story? We've taken it up to, the middle of the 20th century, and of course, we could continue speaking, but it would kind of, blow out the time limit that we have. Is there light amidst all of this vacillating, the extreme positions undertaken by politicians, by Komata? The look, and maybe we have to speak about it. The GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, which pretty much crippled Greece in 2008 as an outcome. Is that also an outcome of this factionalism that's embedded in the polity, in the political
No,
discourse?
I think the GFC is an outcome of the original sin of the creation of the Greek nation, which was that the Greek nation was set up to fail. It was set up to be dominated. It was never meant to be autonomous and to be able to run itself without the intervention or support of these powers. And these are loans that Greece has been refinancing ever since the Treaty of London, where they borrowed money from the London bankers. Yeah. Greece has gone bankrupt a few times beholden to these foreign powers. And I mean, the latest files which have emerged, I mean, the Epstein files, where Epstein talks with Noam Chomsky about the Greek debt, he says that the bailouts that were provided by the West to Greece in no way benefited the Greek economy or the Greeks themselves. It was the bankers paying out the bankers in order to keep Greece in debt and to basically increase the interest payments. So Greece, my opinion is economically and thus politically will be enthralled to its bankers for an indeterminate period. And I cannot see how this will change.
I don't like ending on a bad note.
Well, let's end on a good
But
note.
I'm
Let's see if
laughing
there's any.
nervously, right?
Huh?
And I'm laughing nervously
Yeah.
because someone who's I'm half Greek, you're Greek, we've got Greek family and friends in the diaspora within Greece itself. A lovable people, a people full of spirit, a people full of, dreams and optimism, but also tragic, and that tragedy, if we're to be honest, plays out in pathological ways sometimes. I'm not going to lionize or uh, whitewash Greeks just because I'm half Greek. Um, Nevertheless, yeah, victims of the circumstances of the birth of this nation in betwixt and in between the great powers, which is why I kind of tried to reorient everything to kind of let's talk about Britain, France, and Germany too. We spoke about Russia as well, Greece in between all of these powers, and somehow suffering the consequences of being treated in a utilitarian way.
Okay. Well, can I tell you what the hopeful element that you could possibly end on
Yes.
is this, which is when everything seems dark, when everything seems dysfunctional, paradoxical, absurd, mind-numbingly stupid, this remarkable nation of people always gets together and does something amazing. Yeah. Whether that is decide in 1821, you know what, we're not going to put up with this state which is tyrannizing us, and we're going to be free, and in the process invent nationalism. Yeah, that's amazing. They did that. Yes, we've spoken about the intervention of foreign powers, but these are people that got up one day and said, "No, enough is enough," and saw it through. That is amazing. Then you have a people that in 1940, in a world where France has caved to German fascism, they caved. Everyone caved. Yeah. Where Greece says, no, we're not going to put up with this. We will not be dominated. We say no. We know it's going to cost us. We know it's going to hurt, but we're going to stand up for principle. And they did that. And it was a beacon to the world and a light where people were able to be inspired and say, you know what? You can take a principled stand. You can allow yourself not to be dominated. And you can draw inspiration from that. And they did that in the 1940s. The ohi, the no. Amazing thing. No one accepted it. No one could believe that that was possible. So for me, I draw inspiration from that. And these are focal points to which the Greek people return to time and time again.
Of
And
course.
they never become cliche because they represent an attitude and a way of thinking. Yeah. So if there is hope, it's in the defiance and in the principled stance that lies embedded in our social and political and historical discourse.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Dean. Honestly, thank you for the history lesson for me personally. And even though, we haven't addressed symbolism directly, I'm sure the viewers of Terra Symbolica will find your journey through Greece
Well, we
as
have, I think, addressed it. I mean, Greece is a symbol of something. We
well.
have to make it obvious for the viewers.
I don't have to make it obvious. No,
No, absolutely not.
I won't. I'll leave it.
That's it.
Stay implicit. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.